You're listening to the Do Something More podcast, and this is episode 19, How to Avoid Donating to Scams. Welcome to the Do Something More podcast, a service-oriented show where we highlight the helpers who inspire us all to do something more. I'm your host, Melissa Draper. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Great to have you here with us on the podcast today. And before we start, I would just love to leave a kind reminder. If you've been enjoying this podcast, if some of these episodes have been helpful to you, please go and leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcasts, especially, or other places that you're listening. Those reviews and ratings are what help the podcast be seen by new eyes and get found by people that might be interested in listening to this type of content. So if you've loved the podcast, please go leave a review. So today we're going to be talking about how to avoid scams when donating. And what's interesting, the reason I thought of this topic is I have been listening to the Scamanda podcast. If you like kind of true crime podcasts, but this one's a little different. It's not about murder or any of those types of things. Basically, Scamanda is a podcast telling the story of a woman who told others she had cancer in order to get monetary donations. It's a great, fascinating podcast. I highly recommend it, especially if you're an avid podcast listener like I am. I liked listening to it. It was not only riveting, but really informative too about some of those things. And I thought as I was listening to it that this is something that I think comes up a lot for people that want to give and to help with organizations or charities or even individuals. So it made me think of wanting to do a show on the idea of making donations most of the time that are to reputable organizations and causes. Now, I have to say first, though, before I go into some of these tips, that I think, unfortunately, that there's always going to be scams. There's always going to be these situations. And we do need to be careful about not letting them make us too cynical that we never donate to a cause that feels right or feels important to us. I think that can happen sometimes, especially if you've been a victim. As you listen to that Scamanda podcast, you can hear some of the victims of that situation and how hard it was for them to go through that and process it. But I think it should not make us cynical because there are still very many good people that need our help. And even if we just have a little bit to give, it can make a difference. But I wanted to still go over some common scams that can happen and some tips if you're wanting to avoid those or if you've been thinking about donating to different things. So the first common scam is one that I actually heard this last week as I was listening to a news story on the radio. And they said, basically, if you wanted to sum it up, where there is tragedy, there are scams. Unfortunately, that's true. And we see that with big, worldwide tragedies like the war in Ukraine that caught the world's attention. There were scams associated with that. We see it with local things or on crowdfunding sites like GoFundMe or on social media. And then, as was in that podcast, I mentioned the Scamanda podcast, we can even see it with people that we know personally in our own lives. Unfortunately, tragedy is what moves people's hearts and gets them to donate. But that means sometimes that we need to be a little more vigilant and be aware of what's going on. So that's the first common scam, is just tragedy in general. Another common scam that happens is around the holidays. Many people like to donate around Christmas time to help families or individuals. So that's another time that scams can pop up. And another one, as I did my research, I found that was common was things associated with firefighters, police, or the military. So scammers may say they are taking donations for your local firefighters, police, or veterans, or they're sending care packages to service members or to others. And that can be a common thing that scammers use to try and get people to donate. So those are some of the common scams. Now, what are some tips for avoiding these? Well, this list isn't all inclusive. I'm sure there's many others could add, but I came up with a few that I think can be helpful in these situations. So first of all is, of course, watch how you pay for your donations. They're asking for a money wire or one that's popped up a lot recently for gift card donations. That's a huge red flag. Don't do any of those. And even sometimes, in some instances, even cash can be another red flag. So a lot of places will suggest that you donate with a check or a credit card or some way that you can leave a trail for that donation. So watch how you pay. Second tip, don't let anyone make you feel pressured. You don't need to feel rushed or pressured into a donation. Many times those situations will happen and you might not know what to do, but it's okay in the moment to say, no, I want to think about this. I want to do some research. I want to ponder on how I want to donate to this cause. Even if it's someone you know, even if it's not a charity organization, it's okay to ponder and think about your donation. You do not need to feel rushed or pressured in any way to give. My third tip is to do your research. Many charity organizations, it will be easy to find them on the internet or to research them. There's also websites out there that you can use to help you know if organizations are legit 501(c) nonprofit organizations. I'll leave links to some of those in the show notes, but some of them are the BBB WISE, the Better Business Bureau WISE Giving Alliance, one called Charity Navigator, and another one called Charity Watch. And in many of those, you can put in the charity or you can find what it is and what they do and see how reputable they are. If you're looking to donate to one that you might not be as familiar with. So do your research, make sure and see what kind of organization it is and the things that it's doing. Tip number 4, ask what the money you're donating is being used for specifically. So you can do this with, again, personal donations. This is something you can look for on GoFundMe donations. GoFundMe is another place that unfortunately can have scams and other things on there. But many times it's good to look for what the money's going to be used for specifically. If individuals can say that and list that, then you can have faith, a little more faith that they're going to be using that and they have a plan for the money that's being donated. So that's another one you can do. And even personal donations, you can ask them, oh, I would love to donate. Please tell me, what specifically is this being used for? I've done that myself in the past when I've had people I knew personally that were organizing donations or looking for donations. I just asked them what specifically they were using that for. Was it paying for certain bills? Was it being used to make care packages? What was going in those care packages? And it's perfectly all right to ask a few questions and to be a little curious and to get the answers that matter to you answered before you give money. Tip number 5, document your donations. Keep track of the things that you've donated to, especially if you're someone that likes to donate to lots of different causes. And many times, another trick scammers will use is they'll come and say, you've donated to us before. And that can be a little confusing and make you instantly think, oh, okay, this is something I've given to before. But if you're keeping track of those, you can ask them when that donation was made and be able to go and look at your own records. Also, if you're documenting, if something does end up being a scam, that makes it easier for you to let any investigators or others know exactly how you were involved in that scam, and the money that you had given for it can help in the investigation of that. So, those are just 5 simple tips, really quick here today, to tell you how you can avoid donating to scams when donating to charities or other organizations. So watch how you're paying for it. Don't use MoneyWire gift cards. Don't let anyone make you feel pressured or rushed. Do your research. Ask what the money's being used for, and document your donations. Those are some simple tips. I think it is so important for us to be able to give in monetary ways. Giving of our time and talents is something that we often talk about on this show, but giving with money can also make a difference. There are so many organizations that are doing good things, and those donations, even small ones, can make a difference for the efforts and the things that they're doing. So, again, I don't think that we need to be cynical, even though there are scams out there in the world, even though maybe some of us have even been bit by some of those scams. Don't let them make you too cynical. It's okay to donate and to donate to causes that are important to you. But there's obviously things that we can do. And I think the biggest thing I would say is it's okay to push that pause button and to say, I want to think about this, I want to research this, or I want to figure out how I feel comfortable paying. And I think that one tip alone, just pushing the pause button and pondering on it or seeing what you want to do, can be the biggest tip of all. Don't be afraid to speak up and tell someone that. Just say, I'm not ready to donate to this yet. I will let you know when I am and how much that will be. So those are my tips for today. That, again, were prompted by listening to the Scamanda podcast about people donating and wanting to donate to a good cause. So if you know someone that could use a few of these tips, feel free to share this episode with them. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.